I'll explain a little bit more about myself in just a moment here, but today we're going to be focusing on the role of yoga and embodiment in eating disorder recovery. So, a quick overview. I'll introduce myself and list out the objectives. We'll define what we're talking about. I'll unpack the role of the body in healing the mind in eating disorder recovery and how yoga can serve as a pathway to dropping back into the physical being. Three ways that yoga can specifically support ED recovery, and then help us understand what the difference is between therapeutic versus fitness-oriented yoga. And lastly, we'll end with a quick experiential practice and some tips for integrating embodiment into either your own life, your work with your clients, things like that. And then, of course, we'll have a little Q&A time after. So I am a certified professional life coach with a myriad of other supplementary certifications, such as mental health first aid, um, brain stimulation for depression, all sorts of things. I have been a yoga teacher since I was 15, which is a bit unusual, and I'll go into that in a moment. I'm also a certified peer educator in healthy relationships. I'm no longer in mental health research, but I am still doing advocacy work every day to try to make this a more friendly place and destigmatized place for all of us. And in terms of my philosophical orientation, I have an undergraduate degree in psychology where I really honed my studies in on the psychology of objectification. So, what is that experience of splitting from the self and starting to view yourself from the outside perspective, and how that whole experience leads to disordered eating, as well as training in the psychology of masculinity. So, I kind of see things from a very systemic lens and can see both sides of the coin. And then additionally, I have lived experience. So I did suffer from an eating disorder starting at age 14 and really battled that through college and into my early adulthood. And there was many turning points along my road, but I'm grateful for the ones I experienced in my early 20s that had more to do with yoga and feeling comfortable in my body again. That was my biggest struggle, dealing with the fact that I had to live in my body and be present for this human experience because that was so overwhelming and so much to manage. So I have both the professional perspective of supporting clients in eating disorder recovery and that personal lived experience. So my path to embodiment is also tangled up with my path to disembodiment. So I disconnected from myself at a young age. And there were some vulnerabilities to doing that, right? So I was a competitive gymnast, which was a very aesthetic oriented sport and really encouraged perfectionism. So, two things that make us very vulnerable to starting to have body image issues and disordered eating. To put that on, or to add on to that, I experienced bullying and betrayal trauma in middle school. So right when, the body's starting to change, we're trying to figure out who we are. Identity is becoming really important as an individual, in our early teen years. So experiencing a traumatic event and a series of traumatic events at that young age further led me towards maladaptive coping mechanisms to help me navigate the heavy and intense emotions of these life transitions and try to find some sense of belonging and stability. And I sought that through controlling food and my body. So ultimately, this all led to a mental health crisis. I have a beautiful, brilliant mother who saw this as an opportunity to enroll me in a yoga teacher training program at the age of 15, as well as therapy. So I've been a student and a teacher for 12 years now. And my path with yoga is very windy, and I'll talk a little bit more about the double-edged sword of yoga later in the presentation. But my yoga journey has changed a lot over the years, as has the way that I facilitate a yoga experience for people. So now I am 28. I have been a peer recovery coach for folks with disordered eating for 4 years now, as of this October. And I design and facilitate educational and experiential programs for folks in recovery. A few of them are yoga based. And the reason for that is I really believe you cannot just talk your way into a better life or life beyond disordered eating. At some point, you're going to have to live back in the body, work in partnership with the body, and for that to be a safe and pleasurable experience. So for today, I want to help us answer the question, why do we need to involve the body in healing the mind in eating disorder recovery? I'll answer the question, how can yoga support eating disorder recovery? And then understanding the difference between therapeutic and fitness-oriented yoga and why that difference is actually very, very important. First, I want to get us all on the same page. So there's a lot of ways we can define our terms today, so I'll give us a few definitions of each. From NIDA, we have that eating disorders are a very serious but treatable mental illness that can basically affect folks of every age, gender, sex, ethnicity, and SES. They are not a choice, though I would argue that the choice to recover is a choice, and it's a very empowering one. These are complex medical and psychiatric illnesses and biopsychosocial diseases. So there's so many factors that are playing a role in the development and the recovery of this mental illness. Another characteristic or definition by the APA is that this is a behavioral condition characterized by severe persistence disturbance in eating behaviors and is associated with not managing distressing emotions and thoughts directly, but using the body and food to do that. And again, this affects our functioning on so many levels. Now, Jen, who is actually supposed to be the speaker today, and she is wonderful. I took her Yoga for Eating Disorders mentoring group 2 years ago now. And she has this beautiful quote. So eating disorders start out as a means for protection from pain and trauma. That ultimately leads to disconnection from self and others and dysfunction in biopsychosocial domains of life. So that means that healing from an eating disorder is the process of reestablishing this connection with body, mind, and spirit, emotions, others, and the world. And I think that is a beautiful definition because it really describes what the lived experience of an eating disorder is. Embodiment. So this is sometimes considered more of a woo-woo term, but we're going to try to ground it today. It is not in the APA dictionary. So we can look to other kinds of psychology, such as somatic, to try to define it. So in somatic psychology, embodiment is defined as the felt experience of the body and the thoughts of the mind, and understanding that these are interwoven and depend on one another. Additionally, one's awareness of their felt experiences derives from 3 different sense mechanisms. So the first is exteroception, sensing the environment, proprioception, sensing the physical position of the body, and interoception, sensing essentially everything and anything you can feel inside of your body. And yoga does help us sense all of these, so it helps develop all 3 of our sense mechanisms. To put embodiment even more simply, it is a verb. It's being present with one's felt experience, and it's being with the body instead of at war with it or thinking about it. Sadhguru is not a scientist in the way that we might in the medical field consider scientists, but Sadhguru might consider himself a scientist because he would consider yoga a science of examining the self and making informed decisions based off of the information that you gather. So many people have a misconception of what yoga is, and they think of all of those crazy postures that we see on Instagram and Pinterest, and it's given us this very distorted perception of the practice. But Sadhguru helps us understand it's not about bending and twisting your body. It's a mechanism and technology to get you in a state of experience where you see reality just the way it is. In another psychological definition, it's a mind-body practice composed of physical postures, breathing techniques, and meditation. And the word yoga comes from the Sanskrit root word yuj, which means yoke, to join or to unite. So yoga means union or to merge. What are we merging? We are merging the body and the mind, the breath and state awareness, the self and the higher self, the individual self and the collective. It can help us bring together those parts of ourself that we have rejected and might be trying to minimize or make up for through adhering to the thin ideal or controlling food and weight, and helps us create a more holistic and compassionate self-perception. More grounded also in our unchanging nature and in our consciousness. So it helps also unite what we think and feel with how we behave, and starting to understand how we input relates to the outputs that we experience, right? Cause, effect, action, consequence. And it helps us unite what's happening inside with how we show up on the outside. So starting to resolve that cognitive dissonance. So I love the book, The Body Keeps the Score. And I think it explains really well why yoga is such an important tool for disordered eating recovery. Not included in this presentation is a phenomenal study by Dr. Timothy Brewerton, and he works for Monte Nido and does translational research. He found that about 75% of folks in inpatient treatment for disordered eating meet the criteria for PTSD. That leaves us with another 25% of folks who fall between a range of having a lot of symptoms of PTSD, but not quite meeting that clinically significant threshold to receive a diagnosis, to folks who don't exhibit symptoms of PTSD at all. But what we can take from that study is that majority of people suffering from an eating disorder also have a history of trauma that they're trying to cope with. And then if we look at the way that Jen, owner of Yoga for Eating Disorders, also helps to frame disordered eating, she frames it as a trauma itself. It is very traumatic for the body to live through an eating disorder, to have its internal cues ignored, to not be fed and be able to predict when it will receive nourishment or have its needs met. That's a lot for the body to experience. So even if you do not have a history of trauma, developing an eating disorder can start to cause very similar nervous system dysregulation that you might see in someone with PTSD. So as Bessel van der Kolk says in The Body Keeps the Score, folks' bodies with trauma are constantly bombarded with visceral warning signs. And in an attempt to control these processes, they often become expert at ignoring gut feelings and in numbing awareness of what is played outside inside. They learn to essentially hide from themselves. So in my work, we often call this avoidance or abandonment, and there's a myriad of ways that we do that, but most of them involve disconnecting from the body. And that makes sense, right? Because if the memory of trauma is encoded in the viscera, in the heartbreaking and gut-wrenching emotions, in autoimmune disorders and skeletal muscular problems, this is going to demand a radical shift in our therapeutic assumptions and how we support folks in healing from both trauma and disordered eating. So how can yoga specifically support eating disorder recovery? There's many more ways than three, but for the purposes of this presentation, we're only going to cover these three. So first and foremost, nervous system regulation. As I mentioned, eating disorders are very dysregulating for the body. They tend to activate the sympathetic nervous system. That's why a lot of folks who are underweight consistently report heightened anxiety. It's very hard for the body to relax when it is trying to overcome an eating disorder. Yoga is beautiful because it is a bottom-up healing method, which is gold standard for treating trauma. We can't just think our way into a regulated nervous system, right? We need the body to come with us for the ride and help it feel safe and calm through breath, through slowness, through presence, all of those things. So regulating the physiological state, restoring a sense of safety helps us practice being uncomfortable and in these postures that we might not like. I know I still hate chair pose, but I can tolerate it because I know that, the moment is now, it's temporary, and I can surrender to that discomfort, expand my window of tolerance, and gain important skills for regulation. So this is going to be more effective for emotional and cognitive processing. If we have already helped the body relax, then we can do more mental work, such as CBT. Interoceptive awareness. So we brought up this term talking about the three ways in which embodiment can manifest. And interoceptive awareness is really a safe reconnection with the body signals. So when the stomach rumbles, that doesn't cause panic. Or when the belly is full, we're able to be aware of that, but not reach to self-punish or purge to fix the problem. We're able to just be present with the signal. So this can look like feeling something in the body, feeling motivated to act based on what we're feeling, and understanding the effect of our experience and our actions on our mood and emotions. So again, it's kind of helping folks put together that pathway that my actions matter and how I treat myself matters. It does actually have an impact on how I feel, negatively and positively. And lastly, yoga helps us cultivate self-compassion, which I would argue is one of the most key ingredients for full recovery. And a lot of folks are really adverse to the idea of self-compassion. And I think that is because there's a misunderstanding about what self-compassion is. I think folks think that if I'm critical of myself, then I'll be accountable for change and I'll be motivated to not do that thing that I didn't like again. But what we don't understand is that compassion towards self is actually showing the self kindness and taking accountability. If we messed up, if we had a negative impact, if we want to create change, understanding that that's our responsibility, but we can work towards that with a nice attitude towards ourselves and actually achieve a lot more. So the reason that yoga is helpful for this, because it gives folks the space to show up and notice how and who they are and let go of who they think they should be. So it's this practice of softening and quieting the inner voice and creating room for the body to speak and for us to hear it. When we've been practicing yoga for a long time, the presence is so lovely. But in early recovery, even just 10 seconds of focused presence of just being is a huge challenge because we are thinking and thinking and thinking. So this is, a longer term practice and it really does take time. But as we go, we might notice that we're becoming less judgmental of ourselves in the moment. We're just witnessing what's happening. We're not reacting or fixing our sensations. We're not trying to control or critique the body. We're maybe asking ourselves things with more curiosity. So instead of, why does my body feel this way? Asking with more lightness, okay, I wonder what this sensation is telling me. I'm curious what's causing my body to respond like this. And then being able to honor the body's needs and limits instead of suppressing them or ignoring them. I think this is another really great quote from Jen explaining why embodiment and connecting the body with the mental work is so essential in recovery. Now, I appreciate that she also mentions this, that even though yoga is a wonderful pathway to healing, it's not easy. It doesn't always feel good. It's not comfortable. It can be frustrating. It can take 5, 10, 12 times as much time as we think it quote unquote should for us to get some of these benefits that we're talking about. And then there's this other factor of it's not always safe for folks to practice yoga. And there's a lot of factors that come into play in evaluating safety that we don't have the bandwidth to go into today. But we will touch on one of the broader topics related to safety, which is understanding the difference between therapeutic and fitness-oriented yoga. So I want to start by framing the current state of the world of yoga, which is that diet culture has really hijacked the practice. So it's become very aesthetic focused, matching tight fitting sets of clothing from high quality brands. There might be some perfectionism. There might be a lack of representation of all body sizes. Many yoga teachers, myself included, are living in thin bodies. A lot of students are in thin bodies. It can be used as another form of control, but really it's just self-oppression and disconnection from the body. And some examples of this, um, so sorry if anyone loves these yoga practices. Doesn't mean you can't do these. It just probably isn't what I would recommend for prescribing a therapeutic dose of yoga to someone in eating disorder recovery. But heated power yoga, where there's a lot of mirrors in the room, where it's very fast paced, so fast paced that we can't even be present with what's going on in the body, loud music, all of, pushing to your limit. These are really more signs of diet culture and fitness yoga. And they are certainly part of my path. So when I was in my first 4 years of teaching, I was struggling with an eating disorder. And while I was trained in traditional and more therapeutic styles of yoga, because of where I was at mentally, gravitated in my personal practice towards hot power yoga. And this was such a space for comparison to others. It was very much so just a form of exercise. There was things that we'd hear in the room from other students who are doing a weighted 100-degree yoga class after already having gone for a run. So there's just a level of extremeness in that space that my eating disorder really liked. So it took time for me to kind of see what my practice was and that kind of yoga was for me more clearly, and make my way back to using yoga in a more therapeutic way and to slow down and regulate my nervous system. So to go a little bit deeper on why this mainstream yoga can be dysregulating for ED clients, these are the three ones that stand out the most to me. So in terms of mirrors, if we're finally in an embodied state, we're living from a first person POV, being around a bunch of mirrors for someone in recovery is going to pull them right back into that self-objectified state. So triggering judgment, hypervigilance, and comparison. And second, diet culture has made its way into the cues. So it's made it very instructional instead of invitational. It can often focus on how the body looks over how it is feeling and on the physical alignment as opposed to what's going on inside, including overriding the internal signals that the body is giving you about maybe backing off of a pose or not doing that next level of a modification. But if you're in a room where everyone else is being instructed to do it, you might as well. So some example of diet culture-based cues. We're earning our shavasana today, our rest. We are going to push through the discomfort, finding the maximum expression of the pose. I'll never forget going to a hot power class in the new year and the teacher walking in and immediately, saying that she was hungover, and if we're feeling the activities last night like she was, it's time to repent and sweat it out. So a lot of it's about changing how the body looks, making up for what you've eaten or drank, and reinforcing that we don't deserve to simply be as we are unless we do something to earn it. The last thing with that was not trauma informed. And I think that the first two points that we discussed help encapsulate why it's not trauma informed. So a therapeutic yoga practice would be trauma informed. There is not a single gold standard for what a trauma informed teacher or curriculum looks like. Folks actually can just slap that label on a program or their website. So that is something to be aware of. So if you're recommending trauma-informed yoga to someone, make sure maybe you've gone to that class, you've taken a program with that teacher, or you're at least asking questions about the training that they went through to be able to call themselves a trauma-informed provider. A quick note on orthorexia. So this is also not in the DSM as its own disorder, but it is a serious issue on the rise. And in folks who really care about their health and exercise, There are studies, there's a meta-analysis by Hafstad, Bauer, and Harris that found that 53 or 55.3% of folks who exercise exhibit signs of orthorexia. So that is pretty concerning. This is also potentially related to the rise in fitspiration content and clean eating trends. We are noticing folks really caring more about the health, craving healthier lifestyles, making more mindful dietary choices, which is wonderful. But diet culture has hijacked a lot of this language, and it has made it challenging for the yoga world as well. One form that I have seen of this is yoga can really encourage more pure food ideals and a different kind of diet, Ayurveda, than what a nutritionist might be needing to recommend their client in recovery. So it's really important that we are aware of these potential pitfalls of yoga if we are recommending yoga as a part of treatment, because we don't want to unintentionally exacerbate an issue thinking we're prescribing something that helps. All right, so now we'll go into our experiential practice. So we'll start by finding a nice comfortable seat. If you can, plant your feet on the floor. And take a deep breath. If you feel comfortable closing your eyes, you're welcome to. If not, I would invite you to look down at your lap or something that's non-moving in the room. And without too much thought or effort, start to notice the breath. Noticing how it feels moving through your nostrils and into your belly. Noticing how the chest feels as it rises. And what it's like to let all of that air go back out through the nose. If you notice the mind wandering, that's okay. Just invite it back so that you can enjoy focusing on the breath. We're trying to take just a little break from thinking so we can enjoy being. And as we do this, we might start to elongate our inhales and exhales. If you were doing a 3 or 4 count inhale, maybe going to 4 or 5 or 6, really starting to slow down the breath. So we can slow down the heart. So we can slow down the mind. Good, then dropping the chin down towards the chest. Keeping your spine nice and tall, feeling a gentle stretch, perhaps in the back of the neck. And taking a breath. And then we'll begin to roll the head in circles. So being really present with this movement, going at your own pace. And I really enjoy pairing the movement of my eyes with the movement of my head. So I'm letting my eyes scan the room in a circle. And where my eyes looks, then my head follows. So here I am, present with my movement, with the room around me. And when you feel complete in that direction, taking 2 circles in the other direction. Keeping in mind that as we move more, it's easy for us to activate the mind and start thinking again. So if that's happening, I invite you to focus just on your inhales and exhales. Good. When you find yourself back at center, you can lift your gaze, lift the chin. We'll inhale, reach the arms up, stretch, stretch, stretch. You might lift one arm a little higher and then the other, getting into those shoulder blades. Continuing with your breath. We'll create a cactus with the arms. So pushing the elbows back, opening through the chest, bending a 90-degree angle at those elbows, looking up. Good. And then exhaling, rounding, clasping the fingers together in front of you and pushing the hands palm side out in front, and chin drops back towards the chest. Taking a full breath here at your own pace. Good. And then releasing the arms, shaking the hands up and down, letting out any energy that doesn't feel like it serves you, that's keeping you ungrounded, out of the present, imagining that you're just shaking it out. Only keeping the things that we need here. Good. Another inhale when you're ready, reaching up. Hands come to touch at the top, and with your exhale, letting your breath guide your movement, bringing your hands back down to heart center. Pausing here, either with eyes closed or a gentle gaze, to press an affirmation into your heart, something that you really need to hear today. Give yourself that gift of hearing it now. When you're ready, we'll place one hand on heart, one hand on belly, taking our last full breath together. Just feeling grateful to be alive, to be able to breathe, to be able to have this human experience, to be able to learn and overcome our challenges, and enjoy being in such a beautiful community. You can drop your hands back into your lap or find a comfortable position. If you're thirsty, drink some water. Just notice what your body's telling you. And we'll go into some integration tips. There is a handout with all of these included, so I'll just go over these briefly. But one of my favorite ways to drop back into the body is asking, where is my mind? If my mind's in the past, I'm likely ruminating and experiencing a lot of dense and heavy emotions that are keeping me stuck in the past, in my memories. If my mind's in the future, I'm probably worried and anxious and tight and making up stories about what life might be out of fear. If my mind is in the now, then I'm present, I'm connected to my body, I'm connected to the world around me, and I'm more likely experiencing feelings like acceptance, bravery, and peace. The five senses grounding tool, I imagine that a lot of us are already familiar with this one. Very simple and a great way to re-anchor in the present moment through sensory awareness. And in just a few seconds, this can really help regulate the nervous system. And if the mind is in the past or the future, this is a great way to bring things back to the now. Flow state activities, aka having fun. I learned to surf, I learned to pole dance, I did yoga. All of these things were absolutely game changers for healing from the eating disorder, addressing body image, and reforming a healthy partnership with my physical being. So if a client is really struggling and they're thinking a lot, it's great to encourage flow state activities where they can lose track of time, do something that they enjoy, and just be present without all of the distractions of the mental noise. I know that we live in a time where many folks feel like their language is being policed. So this slide is not about right or wrong, the way that we say things. It's just being mindful about how we individually respond to the language we use and the language that others use. because it does matter and it does have a different resonance. So if I were to say, why are you feeling this way? I feel criticized and judged. But if I ask myself, where do I feel this in my body? I'm feeling curious and compassionate, and I might actually get a more useful answer that helps me feel more deeply and then figure out what to do about that feeling. And lastly, going 24 hours without mirrors or reflective surfaces, something that contributes to continued self-objectification and disembodiment. Both of those are obstacles in eating disorder recovery, is the compulsive habit of self-judgment and objectification. So we want to gently notice urges to body check, ask ourselves, what is this emotional need that the urge to look in the mirror is communicating? Maybe I ate too much for lunch and I'm feeling really full. Now I want to go to the bathroom and lift up my shirt and see, does it look like I gained weight? Even though logically we all know that doesn't make any sense. There's a need for validation and safety there that body checking is working to meet. So we're going to see if we can meet that in a way that encourages presence in the body. After 24 to 48 hours, we can reintroduce the reflective surface and then observe how thoughts, emotions, and self-talk shift accordingly. So are we staying in the body, or does this trigger self-separation and judgment again? And I'll stop sharing.
I'm aware of everybody's time, so I do want to let folks go if they need to. Haley, I'm so appreciative of what you're offering to us. I think it's huge. And I think, I don't know how much you're like trained in relational cultural theory, but if like a lot of what you're saying definitely lines up with, I think, the language that we speak as much as we can about connection and disconnection and seeing eating disorders as diseases of disconnection. And I think you're speaking right to that piece, where a lot of times the work is on, at least for me, I feel like it's like that's got to be happening at the same time as all the other work is the connecting with body. And for me, I also feel like I would much rather work on increasing connection with body than just try to like head on make an eating disorder go away. Mm.
Yes, absolutely. I wasn't familiar with that theory, but I'll go look that up. I'm curious now.
Well, I think you're already practicing it.
That's awesome.
Whether you know it or not, but I think you would enjoy it. Haley, I think it was great. I'd love to like have you back at some point too, because I think you have a lot to offer. Thank you so much for doing this with us today.
Thank you, Dayton. It was a pleasure. If anyone has any questions, maybe Nicole can pass along my email in the integration sheet. I'm happy to meet with
Yep.
anyone individually. If anyone has questions, send them my way. I'm here for y'all.
Yeah,
Thank
I'll
you.
send out that well, I'll put the
You can
sheet,
put your
the
email
handout,
in the chat right now.
Yes.
Mm.
and then I will send out the handout as well. It's also going to be up on the iEcho site
Okay,
with materials.
awesome. Let's see.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Have a great day. Thank you.
Bye.
Haley, Alyssa says hello.
Who says hello?
Alyssa Morales.